Welcome to Season 4 of Hoda's Career Info, the program where career professionals from across the globe meet to empower you to succeed. My name is Hoda, and my guest today is Dr. Michael Healy.
Need to start supporting young people to explore their careers early on and often. If you choose intentionally for your own purposes, from a mature point of view, to take a hiatus, that is a signal of, in your words, strong career literacy. It's a good career management skill to have. People need to do what works for them, not just from the career development success sort of measures like salary and things like that, but from their purpose, from the contribution they want to make.
I'm so excited you decided to join me in Hoda's Career Info, the program where career professionals from across the globe share career tips and personal stories to help you successfully navigate your career. Watch, listen, and learn. And remember to have that very important career conversation with a career professional. Also, remember to like, subscribe, share, and follow me on social media for more career info. My guest, Dr. Michael Healy, is National Career Education Manager at myfuture, the Australian Career Information Service. He is also adjunct research fellow at the University of Southern Queensland. Dr. Michael has over a decade of experience leading the delivery of a range of careers and employability learning services and programs, mostly in higher ed context. Dr. Michael holds a PhD in careers and employability learning, publishing research in leading international journals and edited collections, and receiving several awards for excellence in career development research and education. You can imagine, in my push for career literacy, why I am very excited to have him join me today. So thank you so much for joining me and Dr. Michael. Stay tuned as Dr. Michael shares how he chose his mission, his view of a better future for the career development field in higher education, and most importantly, his expert advice that he will share on topics that are on the minds of every parent and student, from assessing universities to choosing micro-credentials. Dr. Michael Healy, thank you so much for joining me today in Hoda's Career Info. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to join you. I'm very happy at any opportunity that I get to talk to people about career development.
Absolutely. And this is why I reached out to you. You know that my questions are a little bit different. It's not just a bit about career development, but a little bit about yourself to help people get to know you. And the first question is always about giving you a challenge to choose a career term, and you define it from your perspective, not from the dictionary perspective, a term that reflects the work that you do and the services that you offer.
Mm-hmm. Well, so my current role is National Manager of Career Education at myfuture.edu.au. And that's a website that is owned by the state and territory governments of Australia. And it's Australia's national career information service for young people mostly. So it's used in schools around Australia. And my job is to support the teachers and the career practitioners to use it, to develop their skills, to promote, the website and their use of it in schools. So a word that I've been using a lot recently is career exploration. And it's not that unique or unusual, but I'm using it because I'm trying to encourage people to consider career exploration more than they consider career decisions. In schools here in Australia, I'm sure it's true in other places, there's a time sort of in the senior years of high school where all of a sudden kids are told it's time to start making career decisions. You need to choose your subjects that you're going to study in school, and you know that's going to lead to what you do after school. And I think everyone agrees that when you just spring it on kids when they're, 15, 16 years old and say, okay, are you going to do maths, or are you going to do history, or are you going to do art, or are you going to do, whatever? It's sometimes too late for them to make an informed decision. And so I'm saying career exploration is key. And this comes from the research. It's quite clear that career exploration supports good career decision making. But I'm talking about this so much because I really believe that we need to start supporting young people to explore their careers early on and often. So as early as primary school, and it needs to be threaded throughout the school curriculum. It needs to happen ubiquitously all the time in every setting. And by career exploration, I mean, I like the term in comparison to career decision making, because career decision making is quite finite and quite distinct. It is a single decision quite often, or it's presented in that way. But exploration has that element of curiosity, of freedom to do different things. It includes that idea that some things that you go and look at are not going to be the answer. It gives children that confidence to look at things, try things, think about things without the need for them to think that this is going to be the right decision for me. Go and do some work experience, go and read some resources, go and talk to someone. If you don't like it, no problem. Doesn't matter. It's exploration. That's the whole point. So I do think that we can shift just using the different terminology away from this idea that there's a couple of moments in a young person's life where they must make a very serious, significant, consequential decision. We can support that better by shifting the discussion to career exploration. What can we do to support kids to be free and wide roaming in their thinking about careers, and take the pressure off at those really crucial moments? I know as a practitioner, it's hard, to work with some students in those moments because that foundation isn't there. And I think that's really something that we need to look at, supporting people to do better.
I appreciate your choice of this term because I agree with you. We need to start talking early about careers, not to say you're 14, you got to make a decision, but you're 14, let's talk about the careers that are out there. So great choice of term.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, most people, most people in general, not necessarily just young people, they need more options rather than fewer. They think that career decision making is a process of narrowing down their options. And that's what happens in childhood. We know from the research that kids start off dreaming of anything and everything. They can be an astronaut, they can be, a rocket scientist, they can be whatever they want to be. And they narrow that down. And I think for many kids, because they just don't have the awareness of the world, they don't see these things around them, that's narrowing down an already narrow horizon. Whereas I think in those early years in particular, the job of a career practitioner and the job of all educators should be to give them greater breadth in their options, in their awareness. And exploration does that. It takes them into places that they've never encountered before. And so I think that is possibly a huge contribution that we can make when we introduce a kid. In Australia is similar to Canada, where you are, in the sense that it's huge, and we have kids that are living in very isolated areas. They have limited, vision of the breadth of opportunity available to them. So if we can open their eyes to something they didn't know existed in terms of potential for their future, that's an amazing contribution that a career practitioner can make.
Absolutely agree. And it's music to my ears to have you pushing that through a government entity. Can you please share with the audience your story, your personal story, and embed it with it perhaps a message that you'd like to share with the audience in this program?
Sure. So, I mean, my background is it's taken a few twists and turns. So, at university, I did a Bachelor of Arts in History and English. And I was a kid that I was the first in my family to go to university. And it was always expected that I would because I was kind of bookish and, I was good at school, although I didn't really try very hard. I just sort of was able to get, pretty good grades just fairly naturally. So it was just assumed, I think, that I would go from school to university, which I did. I followed my friends to the local uni, and I only lasted 3 semesters, so 1.5 years, mainly because I just didn't feel the motivation. I didn't really understand what I was doing, and I felt like, it wasn't really going anywhere. So, and to be honest, I didn't really make a decision to stop going to university. I just increased the hours that I was working at my part time job until it was a full time job. And I just sort of stopped going to class. I came back and finished my degree in my 20s when I was obviously older, more mature, but I had a sense of something that I was interested in, which was history. Something that was quite typical at that time when I'm from New Zealand, so all this is in New Zealand. It was fairly typical in the time when, if you finished university and you weren't sure what you wanted to do, you could go overseas and teach English. Lots of countries would welcome people with university degrees who spoke English as a native language to teach English to kids in schools and in academies and such. And so that's what I did with a friend of mine. We went to South Korea, and that exposed me to education. And to be honest, I didn't love teaching children, and I knew fairly soon that teaching children was going to be a short-term sort of holiday experience, work experience, overseas work experience. But I got a sense that I enjoyed teaching and I quite liked it, and I was good with English language. And so I thought maybe I could do this a little bit more seriously. So I got a qualification, a certificate in language teaching, and I worked to get into roles in universities doing English for academic purposes. And that took me a few places, a few different countries. And I ended up in Vietnam, where there's an Australian university campus teaching all of their degree programs in English. And so I was working there supporting the English language of those students. And a job came up in the career center, and the manager I knew a little bit. I'd done some work with them, and they said, would you consider applying? And I was really uncertain. I didn't really know what career development was. Um, but I soon realized that career development matched my skills really well because my skills were in helping people to express themselves, to choose the language, the vocabulary to use, the appropriate sort of structures and genres of writing and speaking. So, for example, the first time I gave feedback on a student's resume, I knew, oh, this is exactly what I've always been doing. This is giving feedback on writing. It's just a particular kind of genre of writing. So I felt very comfortable with it. But I also recognized the impact that I could have. When I took one of these, frankly, quite terrible resumes and I helped that student make it into something that would work, that would get the result, I knew I was having an enormous impact on that young person's life because I was maybe the difference between them getting a job interview and not getting a job interview. And that felt very important to me. So that's my entry into career development. And I soon found that it was, I think calling might be a strong word. I don't know that I really felt a sense of calling, but I certainly felt a strong engagement with the job, an interest in the ideas behind it. So I started studying and I got a graduate certificate in career development. And then I started a PhD. I thought, well, I'm going to go all the way with this. I enjoy it so much. My PhD was 6 years in the making. It was a long time coming. It was a part-time PhD while I was working and while I was also trying to be, a decent father and husband in the family. So it was a bit of a challenge, with the time management, but it was worth it because it really got me thinking. It got me talking a lot. So a lot of people know me from LinkedIn and Twitter and presentations and webinars and so forth because I just enjoyed talking about it so much. So that helped raise my profile a little bit. Published a few articles, a few book chapters, and that got me, where I am now, which is leading professional development for career practitioners here in Australia, mostly in that secondary school, context, but a little bit more broadly than that as well. Working with some primary school teachers, working in community services, and just generally talking to as many people as I can about career development and how we can do it. So, if you were to look at my story, I think, you'd see that there was a few different things in there, but the theme that connects it all for me is language. It's, I've always been reading and writing and thinking about what words mean and how we connect them together. I've always been good at connecting different ideas together. So when I'm reading history, I could recognize that this source connected with this source in some way, and I could come up with a link. And so that's why I've adopted career development. I love these narrative methods. I love, career stories. I love, working with people to express their identity. And so I see that there's a common theme there around language and story and narrative and how we express ourselves to each other and to ourselves as well.
I'm thinking of your story, Michael. What would you have as a message for people with going from one degree to another or thinking about what to do next?
I mean, I often talk to people about my career story. I worked mostly in universities, so I worked a lot with students who were unsure about what they were doing. And many of them wanted to take a break. Many of them felt that they were studying for no purpose. They were worried about what it was costing them. And I would try to encourage them to be comfortable with taking a break, going and doing something different. So in most universities here in Australia, you can take a break for quite a long time. I think it's around 6 or 7 years that you can take a break and come back to university in some form. I would always tell people university is not going to go anywhere. They're not going to disappear overnight. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think we can be reasonably confident that most universities will be here for us if we do take a break. And so encouraging them to go, and saying it's okay to go and work, save money. It's okay to go travel. It's okay to do volunteer work. Just because society tells us that, everybody should complete a university degree if they want to achieve career success. Dropping out of university is a bad thing. Don't let that guide you. Do what's right for you. And so I'd encourage them to use the word hiatus instead of dropping out. I said, look, you're dropping out if if you get into trouble and you're kicked out of university. But if you choose intentionally for your own purposes, from a mature point of view, to take a hiatus, that is a signal of, in your words, strong career literacy. It's a good career management skill to have, to reevaluate what you're doing and to make a decision based on what works well for you. A lot of them were concerned with how they're going to tell mum and dad. Mum, dad, I'm not going to go to university next semester. I haven't finished my degree, but I'm not going to go next semester. You know how many parents would respond to that. And so I'd sometimes give them the some of the language to have that conversation. So I would always try and normalize this idea that a university degree doesn't necessarily mean that you complete it all in one go. I changed my major like 3 or 4 times. I really was one of those people that I did the exploration while I was doing it. And I sometimes wish I had been able to do some exploration before I started it. It would have made things a little bit easier for me. I can't recall, to be honest, having a career counseling conversation at high school. It might have happened. I can't remember it. But I wish someone might have had a serious conversation with me about options other than going to university immediately after school. I wasn't ready for it. I would have possibly been better served to have had a gap year or done a diploma of some sort. So I think the lesson I've taken from my own career is that that linear pathway, that sort of expectation of we will do this and then we will do this, and you won't take a break and everything will happen as it's supposed to, is just not true. And again, there's research in Australia. They measure how long students take to finish their degree. In Australia, a university degree is a 3-year full. If you're doing it full time, it's 3 years. I forget the exact number, but the majority of students take more than that length of time to complete their degree. They either take a break or they go part-time because they want to work or whatever else. They might have a family, or, they fail a course, they fail a subject or two subjects. They might have a nightmare semester. And so I often use that to say, look, it's normal. Very few students, comparatively few students, go through university perfectly. So I think just having that discussion about all the wonderful twists and turns and challenges and mistakes, but as long as we're still traveling in a forward direction, as I think I was always sort of working, headed towards a direction of sort of education, psychology, language, narrative. You could have some confidence that that's going to come to something, and certainly did in my case. So I didn't have any idea, any inkling at all that I would, be a career development expert. I would have a PhD on the topic, that I would be in a position, of leadership to talk to people about it. But looking back, it seems fairly logical and fairly natural that it happened. So I think trusting the future a little bit, trusting yourself to make decisions and making decisions that work for you. I'll just add one more thing. Talking to a career practitioner probably would have helped me come to those decisions, feel more confident about them. Again, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I now know the career practitioner from my university back in the day. And I have to admit to them, I never visited the career service. I was one of the students we all complain about. I don't think I knew that it was there. And possibly if I did know it was there, I probably thought it's not that useful to me, because I wasn't a business student. I wasn't doing commerce. I was an arts student. We all know that arts students don't, there's no career for art students. And I sort of bought into that attitude a little bit.
Well, that's why we are having these discussions, to change that attitude and
That's
to
right.
show that there are different careers to choose from, not just the business or the engineering degrees.
That's right. In fact, I do remember the careers fair that they held at my university one year. And I went along. I thought, I probably should take this more seriously. I'll go along and have a look. And it was a lot of sort of finance and commerce, STEM, employers. And there was only one employer that, when I introduced myself, they took an interest in me, and that was the New Zealand Department of Corrections, the prison service. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what they see in me. And I thought, maybe that's education, maybe that's policy, maybe it's sort of something related to arts and humanities. And I asked the person there, and he said, well, actually, you're a pretty big guy. You're 6'2". You've got big shoulders. I think you'd work well. And so they're talking about me, employing me as a prison guard. And I thought, okay, well, that's really interesting if that's my option. And that's when I sort of started looking at other places, such as overseas, teaching English.
Well, that was part of the exploration process.
It was. I mean, it was an interesting thing to think about for 30 seconds before deciding maybe it's not for me. And the funny thing is, now we are actually in the work that I'm doing, we are actually talking to corrections. We're talking to educators and for incarcerated students, for youth in the youth justice system, and starting, because we recognize that helping some of these people identify a career goal might help them be motivated to make the change they need to make. So even that's sort of come full circle in a funny way.
And that's important work as well. I'm sure it will be positive for them to have that kind of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, you mentioned that you wrote articles, and in a recent article, you suggested that higher education communities should adopt a more integrated and critical understanding of careers and employability learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple of questions about that article. You shared a vision on how universities can better support students. Would you be able to summarize this vision, or perhaps share a principle within that vision that you feel will enhance the employability ratio for students upon graduation?
Sure. So the first thing to understand about Australia, and it's different in different countries, the language that we use to describe these things and the way that university services are organized. In Australia, in universities, they talk about graduate employability. That's the word used to describe students getting jobs and having successful careers after university. And so there's researchers in the higher education research and pedagogy space who are researching graduate employability. So you can go to any sort of search engine and look up an article on graduate employability. Generally, what you won't find in those articles is much reference to career development as a profession or as a body of knowledge. Career development has been around as a field of scholarship, has been around 100 years or more. And so I found this quite curious because I came from the career development background. So I would read these articles and I'd say, where are the ideas of Mark Savickas or Donald Super or you name it? And so my PhD was looking at, well, how can we bring these two things together? And that's why I use the word careers and employability, because my research showed that there's career development in universities and there's graduate employability in universities, and the interface is quite slim. And one of the articles I wrote was actually with a Canadian scholar by the name of Candy Ho. You may be familiar with Candy from the University of the Fraser Valley, I believe. Is that correct?
Simon Fraser, yeah.
Simon Fraser University.
Yeah.
And we looked at the profession of career development professionals in universities, and then a whole ecosystem of people doing work that touched on employability. So student development, student leadership, clubs and societies, academics, work integrated learning, or what I think in Canada you might call cooperative learning, things like that. And again, recognizing that they don't really come together. So I guess the main principle that I would advocate, and I do advocate quite strongly, particularly in that article that you're referring to, is that career development should be part of those discussions. The knowledge and the professional practice should be part of those discussions about how we support people. So there are jobs advertised in Australian universities to support students with their employment and their career progression that make no mention of a qualification in career development practice. They make no mention of being a member of a professional association. And I find that quite troubling, because when Candy and I and my colleague, Dr. Jason Brown, looked at those professional designations, we found that only career development has qualifications. Only career development has a professional association. And in Australia, we have the professional standards of career practitioners given to us by the Career Industry Council of Australia. So a very strong sense of what we do and how we do it, and our ethical obligations and things like that, which we found were largely absent in those other areas. There were some professional associations, there were some sort of standards, but not as cohesive and clear as the career development profession. And I think for us, that was one of the major contributions that we can offer to that broader community, to say, you don't have to become a career practitioner necessarily, but being conscious of some of these things will help you a lot in your work. And so we can, subsequently, I came up with an article talking about some principles of quality career and employability learning. And the first thing was that they accommodate both of those fields of scholarship and professional practice. And then there were 6 more specific principles, those being, I've got it on paper here because once I write something, I tend to get it out of my brain. Careers and employability learning is a process, not an outcome. They often talk about, getting the job is the goal, but, any career development practitioner would agree, well, no, it's the process. It's a lifelong process. It's contextual. You can be employable in the town you live in. If you move, you may be less employable. You could get ill. You could have family obligations. Anything can happen to change that. It is ubiquitous. It can happen anytime, anywhere. We can come to an epiphany in the bathtub, the old cliche. So universities treat it like it is something that they can map in a curriculum and that they can identify exactly when and where it happens. But I say, no, that's not true. We can do that to facilitate it, but we need to recognize that the impactful things might be happening in the student's part-time job, or in their volunteer work, or in their sports activities, or in their family. It's relational, dialogical, and narrative. So it's expressed through words and language, and a person is not employable unless they share that with another person, an employer, and that employer agrees and accepts their assertion. So there's a negotiation process. We need to equip students with the language to engage with employers. Careers and employability learning can be traumatic. There's growing awareness. I know in Canada, there's a lot of people talking about the connection of mental health and career development, and recognizing, especially after the experience we've all had over the last few years with COVID, how tough career shocks and disruption can be. And so we need to attend to that, helping students who are already anxious approach a job search, which could create more anxiety and disappointment, is quite important. And the last one is that careers and employability learning can be emancipatory. It can free students to do what's important to them. Some people criticize the idea of it because they say, well, that means that if we accept employability, it means that the university serves the labor market, that the job of the university is to train staff for employers. And they resist that idea. And I agree. I think that's something we need to be careful about. I respond by saying, well, if we equip people to know themselves, to know the contribution they want to make to the world, to understand the environment in which they live and the people with which they interact, the communities in which they, personal and professional communities in which they live, we can potentially help them overcome barriers. We can help them to escape constraints of their own thinking, and possibly some constraints of, systematic constraints. So this is an example of, helping young Indigenous people in the far-flung reaches of Queensland, where I live, to recognise there is potential for them to follow a career pathway that works for them. So those 6 principles for me are, philosophical. They're not necessarily how we teach things in a classroom, but I think if people pick them up and work with them, I think that we'll start to enrich the way that we talk about and practice employability in universities. It
I
seems
really
sort of
like
people have noticed it.
Yeah, I like that the 6 principles. And I think if we look at them from the lens of self-knowledge for students, not necessarily for the labor market, but from the self-knowledge of students, it would be good for universities to adopt.
That's right. And part of what I was responding to was, if you hear, at least in Australia, and I think again in other countries, if you hear people say employability in the context of university, it will usually be followed by the word skills, employability skills, communication, problem solving, things like that you need to demonstrate to employers to be attractive as a candidate. And of course, there's a place for that. But that's really dominated the discourse for quite some time. And so there's a group of us here in Australia and in other countries in the UK that are saying, no, employability is more than skills. It is psychosocial processes of learning and identity. It is purpose, it is adaptability, it is optimism, proactivity, all of these things, because we're saying that employability skills are important at the moment you are applying for a job. But what gets you to that point? What behaviors get you to the point where you are prepared and motivated and confident to have that conversation with an employer? So your skills, of course, will be that conversation, but there's years and years of work of seeking out opportunities, trying new things, career exploration, all sorts of forms of career management skills, career literacy that build up to that time. And so that's where we're starting to focus our attention on things like a sense of career adaptability, being confident to adapt to change, optimism, just generally feeling good about the future, cultural capital, social capital, all these sorts of different things.
Such an important discussion for higher education, and I think we can talk about it forever. But I do have a question from the lens of the students and the parents who are, like right now, might be looking for a university How can we tell them, yes, this can help you facilitate your employment upon graduation?
So I think one of the main things to look for would be to assess the environment of the university, and I mean the physical, but also the sort of digital, the learning environment. You know, some universities are better with facilitating student development. So in the form of things like leadership programs, extracurricular activities, study abroad, all sorts of opportunities for students outside of the classroom to go and engage with people, for a start, make friends, but also start building their networks and building those sort of skills and those attributes and that identity that's going to propel them forward. So many young people and parents often will look at like a university's academic reputation, I think, which is, I think, looking in the wrong place, because that's usually related to research, the research that the PhDs and the professors are doing, which isn't really going to impact that much on the experience of an undergraduate student. So what I think they should be looking for is, how am I going to be welcomed into this university community? If I need help, whether that is with a university assignment or with a resume, or because I'm feeling, down, or I have a medical challenge, or I have a disability, anything like that. Am I able to get the help that I need easily? And so I think looking at sort of non-academic support services, but also how energetic is the university to cultivate, a student community, is something that I'd be looking for. Of course, this creates a challenge if you are going to a university, or you're looking at a university that is more like a commuter university, like the one that I previously worked at here in the town that I live, is primarily, not exclusively, but the average age is closer to 30 than it is to 20. It's a lot of adult learners, mostly part-time learners. So the campus environment can be a little bit quiet, but that doesn't mean that they can't be offering these services in the digital space. So I'd be looking at that. I think COVID taught us a lot about what matters and what doesn't matter so much. So fancy buildings don't allow those to impress you. But look for easy access to services, to activities, to relationships. And of course, when you get into the sort of latter part of your degree, things like engagement with employers, careers fairs, information sessions, work integrated learning. What opportunities do you have?
I appreciate you taking on this question. I know it's different depending on each student's needs and priorities, but thank you for taking it on.
You talk about career literacy. I think something we can work on in career literacy is how to evaluate a university as an option. So to be honest, some students I've seen, they focus on rankings or reputation. And, in Australia, at least, if you're doing a nursing degree, the nursing degree from one university is going to be roughly the same as the next one, because it is so strongly regulated by a central body. Engineering, fairly similar. So what are the other things that are going to impact your learning?
Yes, absolutely. Like, I work with young people, and this is always a question, is that how do I choose a university? That's why I just had to pick your brain on that topic.
I think for many people, it will boil down to convenience and affordability. When I went to university, I went to the one in my hometown because I didn't have the resources to go anywhere else. So, and that's a good decision. That makes sense in that context for that person at that time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another thing that parents and the students are challenging me with is they are questioning the value of a university education, opting instead to think about micro credentials. What are your thoughts on micro credentials? And will universities go away, kind of like you mentioned?
Look, I think that won't happen anytime soon. I think it's good that young people in particular are starting to be a little bit more critical about whether university is the primary goal. And I do think that there's a really good place for micro credentials, but I have a couple of concerns. I've actually written an article about this, a very short one. It's in the Journal of Teaching and Learning for Graduate Employability. The title of it is Micro Credentials Need Quality Career Development Support. So they need people like you and me to talk to them about it. Because the thing about micro credentials is that they often are advertised very enthusiastically from the providers as a single solution to a career problem. If you take this data science micro credential, you will get a job with Amazon. If you do this information systems micro credential, you will get a job. And it's not as simple as that. I think it would be really rare or impossible that someone could do a micro credential and achieve that career goal without having all of the other things that an employer would be looking for in a candidate. I also worry that people might accumulate a random collection of micro credentials. I'll do one of these, and I'll do one of these, and I'll do one of these, I'll do one of these, without any sort of cohesive strategy in mind. What I like about micro credentials is that they are often low consequence enablers of exploration. I talked about exploration at the beginning. So it's much better if you're curious about something to do a micro credential, a few weeks or a month or 2 months of learning about a topic and evaluating the degree to which you enjoy it, the degree to which you're good at it, the degree to which you see it feeding into a career pathway, compared to signing up to a 3-year university degree or even a 1-year diploma. So especially the online space like Coursera and FutureLearn and all of these sort of online, the MOOC platforms, MOOCs were promised to change education. I don't think they quite achieved that, but they are an opportunity. If you're interested in health promotion, I want to work in health promotion. I want to help people adopt a bit more healthy eating habits. There will be a micro credential on that from someone somewhere. There will be a university or a professional body that offers that. And so you can go and get that taster of it. Does it make sense to you? Does it engage you? Does it motivate you? And so that's where I think some of the value lies. And so, yes, if I could talk to myself at age 17, 18, I might have said, don't go to university, but go do one of these. We didn't really have micro credentials back then, but go to the vocational college. In New Zealand, we called them the Polytechnic. Go to the Polytech and do a course in, whatever. Look through the menu, look through the and see if there's anything there. Nowadays, go online and search for something and see what you can find. So yes, I agree with you. I think that there's a place for it, but I do think that they need the qualified expert career development practitioner in many cases to guide them through and understand all of the nuances. Because some micro credentials are very expensive for what they are. They can come at a very high premium, and I think they overpromise in many cases what they can achieve.
And that's always my concern, is that, like you mentioned, you will get a job right away, and you kind of have to make people step back and say, no, that's not necessarily true.
I have a PhD, I've done research. Yes, maybe I could do a data science micro credential and that could, get me in a place. But for an 18-year-old, doing machine learning micro credential, they're unlikely to now go and get a job with Google. I might be wrong, anything.
They would be very lucky. I think they would be very lucky.
I think that's a bit of a fairy tale kind of story. Fairy tales do happen, but for your average student, we need to be a little bit more realistic. So we could talk about them. Yes, the micro credential is an opportunity for you to learn and get a taste of this occupation or this profession or this discipline. But don't assume that or expect that it's necessarily going to launch you into your career. we can also look at labour market information. Here in Australia, we're equipped with really good labour market information that can show you for any particular university degree or vocational qualification what the outcomes are on average for students in terms of employment, salary, satisfaction. And it's hard to escape from the basic underlying piece of data that is university educated people tend to have higher earnings. That for many people is, a pretty key piece of information. So we need to, and this is career literacy again, it's career numeracy maybe, evaluating, what is your goal? Is your goal financial or is your goal purposeful? They can be both. But understanding, if your goal is to earn $1 million, you can either be an entrepreneur, which carries a lot of risk and a lot of reward, or you could angle into one of the professions that is remunerated at that sort of level. So these are discussions we need to have. I've had people tell me that they want to be a teacher, but they want to earn a certain level of salary so that they can buy a nice house. And I've had to take them to the labour market information and point out to them what a teacher earns, which is appallingly bad, in terms of the role that they serve, in my opinion. So these kinds of career literacy are really important, I think.
Absolutely. And it all boils down to career exploration, knowing yourself, and then using the labor market information to see
That's right.
how it
I
all
mean,
fits together.
recently the government in Australia tried to influence people into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics by raising the cost of a humanities degree. And it didn't work, which every career practitioner in the world said that's not going to work, and it didn't work because no amount of sort of financial influence can change who a person is. I could not have studied an engineering degree. I would not have got through it for a start. And I'm confident that it wouldn't have satisfied me or made me happy. So using those sort of levers to influence people might work on a couple, but for the most part, people need to do what works for them, not just from the career development success sort of measures like salary and things like that, but from their purpose, from the contribution they want to make. And it's unfortunate that we live in a world where some of the most important contributions people can make, such as educating children, keeping people safe and healthy, looking after old people, there's sort of an inverse relationship between the importance that those jobs have and the way that they are remunerated and the way that they are supported in career progression. That's my political statement of the day.
I'm loving this discussion, Michael, but I know we have to wrap it up soon.
Sure.
So I've got one more question for you, and that is usually I ask of all guests, because I do encourage my young clients to continually step out of their comfort zone and embrace new opportunities. What are some of the ideas or projects that you are working on and looking forward to share with us?
So in terms of getting out of my comfort zone, I've done some consulting work, but I've never had my own business per se. I've never been self-employed. And I'm curious about that. It's not that I want to quit my job now and, get a website and start, selling my services. But I am thinking more and more about having some kind of product or some kind of service or something that I can put out there that people might actually pay me for. And I have a degree of confidence that I know what that might look like. I think it's the matter of, doing that process properly and sitting down and, sketching out all the nuts and bolts and all the details of it. So I know myself, and I know that when I start daydreaming about something and I start, thinking about it more and more, and I start sort of doing mind maps on a scrap of paper, that I'm getting close to taking a step towards a decision. So I think maybe in the next 12 months or so, there might be something like that in my future. I don't expect it to, I don't expect to not work for an employer in that time, but maybe I could pay for a family holiday, or buy a new bike or something like that for my son. So we'll see. I think I'll treat it like a little bit of an experiment. But for me, that's getting out of my comfort zone, because I've never felt the confidence that I have, the capacity to earn a decent living just off my own efforts. So I've always been a little bit safe in terms of my employment goals, and so I think I might just dip my toe in the water of entrepreneurship and private enterprise a little bit in the near future, and just see how it goes.
Thank you for sharing this dream. And if we don't talk about our dreams, is what I tell my clients, they won't happen. So we need to talk about them and share them. So thank you
That's
for
right.
sharing it on this program.
Yeah, so stay tuned. You might see something come up in the next 12 months or so, or you might not. Maybe this will come back to bite me, but we'll see.
Well, I usually like to wrap up by asking you if there's anything else you wanted to share, one more tip, career tip, or advice with the audience.
Oh, look, I think the only thing I'll share is to thank you for inviting me and to congratulate you on doing this, because I think something that we need more of in social media, in YouTube content, whatever you call that, is discussions about career development that are anchored in qualified professional discussions. There's a lot of career advice. There's a lot of career influencers on social media that really are just making it up as they go, talking quite often a little bit of nonsense. And so I think, when I looked at your YouTube channel and I saw, Tristram Hooley and Ed Hidalgo and people like that, I thought, okay, this is different, and this is good, because we can inject that into the conversation and just remind people that there are foundations of knowledge and professional practice that career practitioners, professional qualified career practitioners, work from. And so I think that's a service that you're providing, and I thank you for that.
I appreciate your feedback so much, Dr. Healy, and I appreciate having you on this program. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's version of Hoda's Career Info, the program where career professionals from across the globe join me to empower you to succeed. My guest today on Hoda's Career Info was Dr. Michael Healy. You can connect with Dr. Michael on LinkedIn. One of the questions discussed with Dr. Michael Healy focused on micro-credentials. Take the time to re-listen to Dr. Michael's tips and commit to reflect on your future choices. Remember that you can listen to Hoda's Career Info, since it is also dropped as a podcast. To let me know if you are interested in an opportunity to talk about your work, you can send me a direct message on my website, rightcareerfit.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date on the latest episodes. Please like, subscribe, share, and follow me on social media for more career info. I am your host, Hoda. Until next time, remember, your time is valuable. How are you spending it?